My father's name was Robert Eugene Giddens. He was born April the 22nd or 23rd. There's always been some controversy over which is which. But anyway, he was, and the year was 1906. And as far as I know, he was born in Willacoochee, Georgia. His parents were Mamie Asbel Giddens and J.T. Giddens. Those are my grandparents, my paternal grandparents. They lived in Willacoochee, and my mother and father were married. I think it was around 1927 or so. They moved in with the family, the Giddens family. And my father was a house painter. He kind of followed in his father's footsteps. He was a house painter, and he was a good one, and he also did hanging of wallpaper. That was his livelihood, and that's the way he supported his family. We lived in Willacoochee for a time, and I can remember after some point we moved from Willacoochee to Douglas, Georgia. My father was looking for better jobs, and so we decided to move to Douglas. My father didn't have any mode of transportation. There was no car or anything or truck, and he had to depend on some of the people that helped him with some of his jobs to transport some of his equipment, ladders and that to jobs. So anyway, he found that in Douglas, and we lived in Douglas for several years. And at that time, there were three of us. There were four of us. Myself, my older sister Winnell, who was born in 1929, and my brother next to me, Robert, he was born in 1934, and Betty, and I think our birth year was 1936. So there were four of us children at the time, and we all started school in Douglas. And I went into the fourth grade, as I recall, in Douglas, and this would be, I believe, about the fall of 1941. Then we moved back to Willacoochee, and we moved into an apartment in Willacoochee. Actually, we moved from that place, that apartment, into a farm. The farm came into our family this way. When my grandfather Fletcher died, he left the estate. The farm that my mother acquired was just on the outskirts of Willacoochee. In fact, most of it was inside the city limits. And there was a house and 4 outbuildings, including the outhouse, and 174 acres, give or take an acre or so, of land, both farmland and timberland. And the southern boundary of the property was the Arapahoe River. Some of the land, about 20 acres or so, was in Berrien County on the south side of the Arapahoe River. The way that the farm came into the family is, it was, as I said, it was part of my grandfather's estate. And my mother had a cousin, Kathleen Gaskins, whose husband was a well-known citizen of Atkinson County. And my mother always trusted his judgment in a lot of her dealings. And he advised her when that farm came up for auction, when they were liquidating the estate, when that farm came up for auction, he advised my mother to bid on it. When my mother had acquired some cattle also from the estate, so she decided that she would sell the cattle and use the money to bid on the farm. Well, she asked her cousin, Kathleen's husband, Burnell, to bid for her. And he did, and she bought the farm at the time for a ridiculously low price. That farm was her pride and joy. It was the best thing she'd ever owned of her own, and she loved it. So we moved from the little apartment in Willacoochee beside the main highway to the farm. Glenn was born, my brother, youngest brother, in 1944. And then in 1948, my youngest sister Gail was born. And those are the only two that were born out there. And my father decided, besides being a house painter, he decided to be a farmer too. So, and he turned out to be a pretty good one. We had some really great crops. We planted tobacco. That was our mainstay crop, and we raised corn and some great vegetable gardens. And sometimes it was, well, most of the time, farming is always very hard work, and it's a 7-day, job. And we had no tractor. We were able to get one mule, so I followed that mule around those fields for many a mile, plowing the ground and planting the seed and doing all the other things you have to do to grow the crops. But it was a great time in our lives. Sometimes very aggravating and frustrating, but because the elements are always against farming, the drought, the hailstorms, and all that. And but in spite of all that, we did fairly well. And my dad grew. He knew how to produce great produce and farm crops. In the summertime, of course, we worked on the farm early on, but we did have fun. We played baseball. We had plenty of room to play baseball out there, and we would swim in the summertime in the river, and we would fish. We'd go fishing, and we would. I myself made my own toys. When I was younger, I would take a limb from one of the pecan trees and cut wheels out of it and find me some scrap pieces of lumber and make myself trucks and cars and airplanes, and that's what I did, made my own toys. But in the summertime, we did a lot of just playing in the yard. Sometimes until darker after. My parents would have to call us to come in, and get washed up, go to bed. But we would play a game called Red Rover. We'd have maybe a tennis ball or a rubber ball we'd gotten somewhere and throw it over the top of the house to somebody on the other side and catch it. And then they would throw it back and we'd catch it. We did those things. We had no television. We had no telephone. We had no electricity. We had a radio. The radio had belonged to Uncle Paul. And when he went into the Navy, he just left the radio with us. And the radio, without electricity, we had to use batteries to listen to the radio. Sometimes, the reception was good, sometimes at others. But we would listen to the radio a lot at night. Saturday night, if the reception was good enough that we could pick up the radio station in Nashville, Tennessee, we would listen to the Grand Ole Opry. We listened to a lot of radio, especially in the evening. Mm-hmm. Yeah, after my grandfather died, the date was on March the March the 3rd, 1975. Spent some time, just by herself there at home, and she was kind of, free. She had a lot of freedom. But eventually she did get a job. She worked at one of the stores in Willacoochee. It was a kind of a general store. But she got a job and she worked there for a time. And then after a while she got a job driving a school bus in the summertime, during the school term. And so she did work at some jobs. But she liked to go places with her friends. She had a new circle of friends kind of that she began to associate with, that she wasn't able to do because Daddy was so sick for so long, and she wasn't able to do that. But she was able to do a lot of things that she wasn't able to do prior to his death. And so she was enjoying life, and after a while she was appointed the manager of the Senior Citizen Center I believe in her 80s, in Willacoochee by the mayor of Willacoochee. The mayor appointed her, told her to run the Senior Citizen Center, and she took it like it, she ran her household. She liked to be with the people, and she delivered the meals on wheels in her own car, and she liked that. And so she enjoyed life, and she had a lot of freedom. And eventually, though, she got down to the point where she was no longer able to do anything because she was approaching her late 80s, and at age 93, she passed away in her bedroom, in her bed, in her house. And we were all there with her together, except my brother Robert. He had passed away in 1994, and this was 2003. And Robert had passed away as a fairly young man. But we were all there, and she died peacefully. My thoughts on my mother is I cannot think of a more splendid lady. She was she was generous. She would do anything for anybody within her power. That was one of the things I remember about her generosity. And she loved her children. She loved her family. She loved her home. And she was well respected by everybody in the community. And on her passing, at her funeral service, the crowd at the church was just overflowing. And that's the thing I remember about her, how hard she worked when we were growing up. Never complained, but she did what had to be done, and she did it without, ever complaining. She had some rough times in her life, and we tried to give her all the support we could, but she was very strong. She was a strong lady, and she had a lot of wisdom. I think the wisdom came to her from her grandmother Fletcher, but that's the things I remember most about her.